Hello, my guest today is Kyle Dow. He is one of my best friends, and he's a psycho-spiritual integration coach. That's what I've learned about Kyle. And we talk about a lot of really cool things on this podcast. We talked about love. We talked about learning to play harder in this life. We talked about indigenous wisdom and a specific event that he just went to that was mind-blowing. We talked about a bunch of other stuff, but really learning to open our hearts in this life. And I hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you do want to connect with Kyle and learn more about what he does and his offerings, all of his information is going to be in the links below. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, Kyle Dow.
What's up, brother?
Well, I'm excited to speak with you today.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
You're a man of questions, aren't you?
More questions than answers.
Yeah. Kyle, what's the question? What is the question?
What is the question?
Yeah, what's a good starting question?
What the hell are we doing here?
That's a great question, yeah. What are we doing here? What are we doing here?
I don't know. I think we came here to play. To really have this experience in form, in touch with the sacred sensual, and to be in relation to everything around us but one another, right? So this intentional separation, so we can have a different perspective on how we are connected. And
I like that you're leading with play. That's why we're here, to play. That's the word that's resonating the most.
Yes, but I don't feel that we're playing at full capacity currently. I think we've kind of like collectively lost the path a little bit.
Right. So there's a ton of potential for play, and we are not tapping into that full potential. Let's talk about that. Okay. Yeah. I definitely want to play harder.
Yeah.
Because I love playing.
Yeah.
Right. What are your favorite forms of play to start with?
I think I'm habituated to saying rock climbing, because that's been such a passion and a major influence in my life for so many years. But this year I've climbed like 6 times, and I've just kind of changed my focus a little bit more into the ceremonial space, the personal development space, the creation space. And it's really a matter of time. So climbing is a form of play, and also music is coming to be more present in my life.
Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying playing music, and that's just like me and my guitar in my living room and rocking out. And that's probably where I find a lot of joy, which is a major component of play.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been playing actually more guitar as well lately, and just singing more. And actually recently have just signed up for kirtan training.
Ooh, nice.
To learn how to like lead kirtan.
Cool.
Which will be like kind of a 1-year journey, I'd say.
Cool.
Like just to get the basics, I mean.
And is that like vocal instruction or just like how to lead the mantras?
I think both, and instrumental. So it's through Kirtan Vancouver, which is the main, I don't know if it's the main place, but like they're teaching you how to lead kirtan, and like just the basics of harmonium, and like, I don't even know what I'm going to learn, to be honest. I just know I like singing. It makes me really joyful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important to sing, and it's a way to connect with ourselves. Like I've heard Paul Chek say that the vibration that we emanate is the vibration of our soul. So in the process of singing, we're connecting with our soul, but also as we sing with others, we're harmonizing with them and we're connecting with them, which is a really beautiful and important experience, and something that people used to do in villages and communities more regularly than we do now in our separate lives.
Yeah. So I want to keep going into play a bit more, but for anyone watching this, what's important to know about you? What's some good like base, or is it better to know nothing about you and just hear your words right here?
Well, it's all just a story that I'm making up anyways.
Sure, yeah, let's go with it. What stories you got?
What's important to know about me?
What's important for someone to know about you when they meet you?
Okay.
Because some people are probably, if anyone's watching this,
I'm very like non-conformist.
Okay.
I'm very alternative in thought and action, I would say, in the way I try to structure my life.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Thanks. Thanks for noticing. Thanks for paying attention. And with that, I've always just kind of been outside of the box a little bit, and it's always been about this pursuit of passion. And so that's primarily been mountain sports through skiing and climbing.
Yeah.
And that was when I was still just like a party animal and drinking many nights of the week. And I was out in the mountains kind of with less intention than I have now, but it still became the foundation of my spirituality as I was having this connected experience without recognizing what was actually happening. And in that process, I was also cultivating mindfulness, because as you know, when you're climbing and you're in a scary situation, I become very aware of what's going on in my mind and like how my body is responding to the intentional stress that I put myself in.
Yeah. So it really sparked a lot deeper levels of mindfulness outside of climbing.
Yeah, eventually, many years later on the climbing journey, I had like an aha moment where I was sitting beside the river with my buddy, just like crushing beers. Again, not like really intentionally focused on connecting or like appreciating the landscape or the different eco field that I was present within. And he said, what do I like want to make of my life? And my response, which came out of nowhere, was, I'm not sure, but there's more to the human experience than meets the eye. And that's kind of been like my foundational curiosity since then as I've pursued spirituality. It's like, okay, what is there that I'm not aware of? Like, what are the known unknowns and what are the unknown unknowns? And like, how can I expand into greater consciousness to then come back and play at even fuller capacity?
Right. Yeah. So what are some of the unknown, what was it? Unknown unknowns?
Yeah. Yeah. Because
what are some of the unknown unknowns that are now known?
Ooh, interesting.
That have come up in like, let's say in the last 12 months, as the world's doing its thing. We seem to be going through a pretty interesting, to say the least, transformation.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that stands out over the past year or so. If I back up a little bit further, something that really came into my awareness was through my experience at Fairy Creek. And just in brief, for those who are not familiar, Fairy Creek is this activist movement where people are actively blockading the logging trucks from accessing old growth forests. So it's in defense of the old growth forests. And so that's kind of like the surface level and what draws everybody there. But once I was there, I recognized that it's much more than that. It's a land back movement, which essentially means returning the land to the stewardship of the rightful stewards, which are the First Nations of this country.
Yeah.
The First Nations that existed before this was a country, right? And so in being there, I recognized the true history of Canada and some of the atrocities that have occurred through the genocide of colonialism. And that came with like a lot of guilt and shame, one for my ignorance, and then two, just...
You personally felt guilt and shame?
Yeah, for my ignorance to the true history of this land. And also...
did you feel also guilt and shame for a bigger scale for like, are the people of this country, or was it more of a personal thing? Yeah,
it's like guilt by association, right? Like at the end of the day, I am a white settler, right? And so at some point in my lineage, we came over here and took over this land. And it's like, okay, well, that is representative of a lot of the problems that we see throughout the world. And it's incredible to think that to this day, the genocide continues. And it's like the eradication of a tradition. the eradication of a spirituality, an eradication of a way of life and a way of being, because the white man was afraid of the power of these people because they were so connected to everything around them.
That is the power.
That is the power.
The power is the connection to
exactly
yourself, the earth, and everything else in between.
And others, all my relations.
Totally.
Right? And so now we live in this settler society that is very disconnected, and it perpetuates all these different mood disorders and mental ailments that are prevalent across the board. 60% of people suffer from things like anxiety and depression. So it's like, come on, people, we're doing something wrong. We're not playing at full capacity.
I was about to say, that doesn't sound like we're playing.
No, because we're so disconnected.
Yeah. Yeah. How long were you at Fairy Creek? I was there for like 5 days or something.
I was there for 2 months. I was doing like 4 or 5 days a week for 2 months.
I was there for 5 days, and by the end of 5 days, I was absolutely beat down.
Yeah.
Like going on missions and stuff. And maybe that's just because I was such a newbie. Mm-hmm. But I barely slept, and they kept on getting sent on all these missions, and there was so much urgency as well. So you like almost felt guilty to sleep. Mm-hmm. But I guess you find your rhythm after 2 months.
You do, and there was something really magical about that land, because people were just like beating the crap out of themselves in terms of like the physical effort and even the emotional exertion to be there on the front line and dealing with the RCMP and the loggers day in and day out. Like, it was exhausting. And somehow that land seemed to energize us. Like, I was never tired while I was there. And I would get up at 5 a.m. to be on the front line, because I was acting as,
what is the front, like, how would you describe what the front line means at Fairy Creek?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a pretty intricate setup there. So this has ended this summer, but after like 2.5 years, it was an active blockade.
It's not a blockade right now anymore?
My understanding is that it's not currently active,
right.
And they'll probably like set up another blockade somewhere. Like, it's an ongoing battle, right? Of like the people and the First Nations essentially against the government and the logging industry. And the government doesn't recognize how important it is to protect the remaining 3% of old growth forests, which is just like an absurdity that, again, is representative of how backwards we have it.
I think that was what shocked me the most. Once I actually saw Fairy Creek, and actually I went, one of the days I really did go, like, I got to see what I'm here for. And like, some of these trees were just like 1,000-year-old trees. And it's like I was overwhelmed by the idea that anyone could cut it down. Like, no way. If anyone saw this, like any human being, especially a Canadian, like my whole association with Canadians at the time was just like, any Canadian loves the forest and loves nature. That's just very embedded in like the values of like Canadians, is what I thought. And I just saw it and I'm like, no one would cut this down. It's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that totally conflicted with the reality of the situation, which is absolutely it'll get cut down and they will do anything to get to it. And it's just, and I also felt like this machine that's going to cut it down is absolutely relentless. It's unstoppable. It's so powerful. And I cried a lot, and it made me so sad. Just like, I cannot believe that somebody would chop these things down. And not just one of them, like all of them.
When they're going extinct.
When they're going out. So you can't just regrow this stuff. 1,000-year-old trees, you can't just fix it. Once it's gone, it's gone. Mm-hmm. These ancient beings.
So it's like the genocide of the First Nations has become the ecocide of the land, as extractive resources will stop at like no cost to make a profit.
Yeah.
And that's a funny sentence. No cost to make a profit. They actually spent more money in enforcing like the police presence to get rid of the activists than the value of the timber sales within that forest. So then it becomes like...
Really?
Yeah.
Who's paying these bills?
The taxpayers.
Oh, man.
So let me paint a bit more of a picture. I didn't think we were going to arrive here, but here we are. The front line essentially is where people have put these different blockades across the logging road, which usually involves a human body to prevent the logging equipment from coming up the road
like
to
the physical
the
trucks
cut blocks.
and more.
Well, yeah, sometimes we would use vehicles, sometimes we would put bodies. And so what seemed to be really effective is digging a trench across the logging road and then putting a human body in it, but also having that human body attached to this tube, this plastic tube that was cemented in the earth. So imagine a person laying face down with their arm chained to a clip that's in a tube that's pointing straight down. And like
It sounds scary.
Yeah, scary for the humans.
Yes.
Especially when the cops were not being diligent about not doing them harm. There's a lot of harm that was created from the cops, both emotionally and physically, in how they treated these people who had put their bodies on the line to protect the old growth forests.
Yeah.
And so then they would come in with the extraction team to try to get this person out, this human out of the way, and then they would move to the next obstacle. And so we would put obstacles all the way up the road, as many as possible. And we would build these giant tripods and put people in them in the air. And
sounds like a war zone.
Yeah.
It's like a battle.
It was kind of like a hilarious game of cat and mouse. And then it was less of a game when people were getting hurt. Right. And the people who got hurt the most were the BIPOC people, the First Nations people. And like I saw firsthand how the RCMP was rougher with people of color than with white settlers. So then the idea was like, okay, if you appear as a man and you're a white man, you should be on the front line because they're not going to kick your ass as much as they will a First Nations female, which is just like crazy. And so I saw that like that reality came like crashing down on me, and it changed my worldview forever.
So let's talk about that. So this came up, and I know it was an impactful time. What changed? So this is what, a year and a half ago now? 2 years? About a year and a half?
It's a year ago actually that I was at Fairy Creek.
So your worldview has shifted, and what is that change?
Like even greater disillusionment with how society is and how it's like intentionally structured to keep people small, to keep people separated, to keep people disconnected, to keep people from asking questions. We have
this is because it's easier to control people when they're fearful.
We have this capitalistic system that makes it so people have to like work all their energy away to the point where they don't have the energy to question the way things are. And they think this is just it, like this singular human disconnected experience where we come here, we don't do anything meaningful, and then we die and it's game over, right? Like the finite game. People are fooled into thinking it's just this finite experience.
Right. When it isn't. When it sure isn't.
Exactly.
That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
I had a very similar, one thing that happened because of also Fairy Creek, and I think just COVID-19 and all of that stuff. I had a lot, I think my whole life just trusting the government fully. That's kind of just being taken for granted on my end, and it sucks that I don't have that trust anymore. It was nice to have that trust. And that got broken for me. And it's kind of like a part of at some level, it's like it's a part of your safety net just fell apart. Right? It's good to have like a family and a community and like a country that you love. And I still love my country, but I don't know. It's just like it's just the trust thing. It broke at some level.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a hard one to snap out of that story and that perception and that belief of the government being like our primary caretaker and having our best interests at heart, because that's not the case. And if we like back up to older times, like the king was always trying to remain the king.
Naturally.
Right? And to not
Classic.
like, and then there's people that were just serving his needs, right? The peasants were down there doing the work so that the king didn't have to. And that model has essentially perpetuated itself to what we have now with modern government. And they don't want people to see through their illusion. So they don't want people to know that life could be so much better.
How active do you think all that is, the psychology of like what you just said? Is it like a totally subconscious thing? That's just what's occurring because the model's just perpetuating itself? Or is it like very consciously curated from above?
Well, if you look at the propaganda and then also the messaging that is ubiquitous across all sorts of media sites, like they are definitely trying to shape the individual reality tunnel. And that's something that we could get into a little bit as well. So they want us to think a certain way, eat certain foods, drink drinks, like live life in this disconnected way. So I think that's a hard thing.
It's easier to monetize?
Yeah, easier to monetize. It's all about capitalism.
I know what he's going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a stretch for people to imagine that there is intentional malice amongst these world leaders, right? People don't want to believe that. And
it's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, but the signs, like the painting is on the wall, you know?
Yeah.
And especially when we see how everything's been mismanaged over the last 2 years. And so at some point, if we want to see change, if we want to have a different life, a more beautiful world where we can play at full capacity, we're going to have to face the hard realities of what stands in our way of that more beautiful future.
Yeah, and like taking this back to Fairy Creek, one of those hard realities, I think, again, it goes back to just because of our structure in capitalism, you know, you have these, I'm sure most loggers love the forest and love the trees, but then they're fighting this thing like, I also love my family, and this is the only thing this is the industry, and I need to get paid my income. So it's something overrides the value. And I think we have that all over the board, right? It's like, look at every product in our society. It's like, I don't want you to drink Coca-Cola, but I work at the Coca-Cola company. So maybe drink some. Don't drink too much of it, but it's okay to have a little bit of Coke.
Right.
Or a little bit of this or a little bit of that. And maybe you need a new car and whatever the heck your job is, right? It's like it. Because one of the things that I've noticed from my business background, it's like, what am I serving? Like I'm doing breath work and I dance. These are free. They don't cost anything. I'm becoming I am buying more audio equipment now, but you know, the values are changing. Like those needs are falling away. And that's a really big interference with the basis of capitalism, which is we need to grow. And I think there's that conflict happening right now. And how we face that is, actually, I'll ask you, how do we face that? People want to pay their mortgages. They want to have cars and they want to go climbing and just drive to the crag. But yet these are all the things destroying Mother.
Yeah, I think there's better ways to do things. I think there are renewable resources and technologies that are kept hidden from us. And I don't know a lot about that, so we won't delve into it too far.
Yeah.
But I think there are alternative ways, but people will not promote and develop the alternative ways that aren't going to make them a profit. So people still have this mindset of like, well, I'm going to get mine, you know, screw you guys. I'm going to get mine. Screw the planet. As long as I'm making a profit and I could live.
That's the current structure though.
And I could live as comfortable as possible in this one life, in this finite experience.
Right. If you believe it's the one life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so if we had a little bit of forethought, which is part of the First Nations wisdom and teaching, is you think about the 7 generations to come. And with our current trend, we might not make it past the next 3 generations, right? So if we want our grandchildren to have the privilege of coming down here to this earth, to this realm, to have this human experience, well, we have to maintain the playing field. And everybody's just busy destroying the playing field because they don't recognize the bigger picture. They don't recognize the interconnection of all things. They don't recognize the web of life. And so it's like, yeah, let's cut down the trees. Let's sell the Coca-Cola. Let's poison the people through food and pharmaceuticals and the water and everything else, rather than being like, oh, you're actually me. You're part of me. It's all part of me. It's all part of God. How can we tend to our garden and make it flourish?
Yeah. How can we?
It's such a big thing to think about it. And I've thought about it a lot for the past couple of years. And I think that's why people just keep their head in the sand, because it's overwhelming. Because I went through many phases of despair, and it really was uncomfortable and not pretty. And I wasn't playing much at the time. But it's like going into the darkness. It's like looking at our shadows so that we could get through it and get to the other side. So it is the process of like contraction and expansion for growth.
Yeah.
And a wonderful saying that I like is that the difference between a man and a king is that a king will not look away. So let's face the harsh truths of our current situation so that we can alter them. And so when we think about like the big picture, it's like, man, there's no way we could like defeat the government. And I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about figuring out how we want to experience our life, right? So lifestyle design, and doing that and modeling it for others. So then they become inspired to do the same. And many different people across the world are getting the call, they're hearing the call to live in community once again. And so this could be like the intentional community model. And it's been tried.
Kind of what we've been doing. Like we're just in the basic early stages of curating that and learning.
We're moving in that direction. Yeah. I think we're testing the waters. I
love it.
And I think there's a long way to go.
I think there's a long way to go too.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine the idea of, I just love people. I love having people around and just like, it's just family everywhere. And
that's the connection. And
it's cheaper. It's really better in every way as far as I can see.
Mm-hmm. So if we were able to get to a point where we had a live-in community that was self-sustainable, so now we have our own food, water, and shelter, right? Which is like easier said than done. Once we get to that place, well, we don't have to outsource to meet our needs. And with that, we also don't have to do what we're told in order to be able to meet our needs, right? So we don't fall victim to government coercion. Now, if we have one community doing that, and then we have a sister community with like somewhat similar alignment or shared ethos, then we could rely on each other. We could come together for connection, collaboration, and celebration. Now, what happens if we have 10 communities like that are all at the Dunbar number of 150 people? And then what if that spreads across all of like Vancouver Island or all of BC, and it just continues to percolate out? Like that's how the change is created, right?
Like
these small steps, but we don't have to worry about the rest of the world. We just have to live how we want to live.
I love that. Thank you. So I want to pivot the conversation a little bit. You just got back from Sundance, which is, as I understand, a very incredible experience. I don't know a lot about it, and I haven't actually caught up with you about it yet either. So if you're open to sharing about that, I would love to hear about Sundance. And I don't even know what the question is really. What is it, first of all? And what was your experience there? And start from the basics.
Yeah, I could share a little bit about the experience. It's something that's really fresh and raw, and I'm still trying to figure out how to speak about it in a relatable way that doesn't take an hour.
Right.
And I've done like the hour-long description a couple of times with friends, so maybe we'll take that off air.
Right.
Sundance is a First Nation ceremony that was, so in their mythology, it was given to them from the white buffalo calf woman who came from the stars and gifted them many of their ceremonies, including the sweat lodge and also the Chanupa ceremony, which is the tobacco pipe. And so this particular ceremony is done in different ways amongst different nations. It also appears in other indigenous cultures outside of North America. And typically it consists of 3 or 4 days of dancing around this tree,
Around a tree?
Around a tree.
Okay.
Yeah, so within an arbor. So the arbor is like this big circular enclosed area, and at the center is a tree that is harvested from the forest. And there's a huge ceremony around the harvesting and also the taking down of the previous trees. So last year's trees stayed there for the entire year, still holding everybody's prayers and intentions for that duration. And then they remove that one, chop it up, use it to start the fire, the sacred fire that burns for the duration of the entire ceremony. And then they bring in a new tree. And so the entire ceremony is about self-sacrifice in order to have our prayers heard, but a lot of the prayers and intentions are for people outside of ourselves. So the slogan continually that was heard throughout the week-long process that I was there was for the people. We're doing this for the people. And it really was about awakening spirit and bringing spirit back in deeper capacities in our own individual lives, but also the lives of everybody, like of humanity, really.
So you're dancing for the collective. You're
Dancing
really opening the intention to much bigger than yourself.
That's right. That's right. So these dancers were there in the arbor for 3 days without food and without water. And they're about 12-hour days, and there are small little micro breaks in between each round, and each round consists of honoring the 4 directions. And what was really intense to witness is that the male dancers had a whistle that was made out of, I think, an eagle bone, and they're blowing through the whistle the whole time in
4 days?
For 3 days.
Wow.
And the sun is just like beating down on them, 30 plus degree weather every single day, and they're out there, no water, raw throats,
no food, no
blowing
water.
this whistle. And so it becomes like a form of breath work really as well. And so in this process, these dancers are getting into a trance, like they have an altered state of consciousness. They're expanding their consciousness and receiving downloads or messages that are in accordance of their prayer, right? They're finding answers for their prayer and guidance from spirit. And the tree is at the center of the arbor, and in line with the tree is the sacred fire. And I was working as a firekeeper. So I was tending to the fire. For the duration of my shift, there was about 16 firekeepers, and I would wake up at 1 a.m. and go help build the fire on top of all the volcanic rocks that would then go into the sweat lodge. But some chiefs like to refer to it as a purification lodge. And within the enclosed area where the dancers were not allowed to leave was 8 small lodges where you could fit maybe 4 adults in. And so there was a men's side and a women's side. So the dancers would wake up at 5 a.m, come out. The men weren't allowed to wear a shirt outside of their teepee. They would sleep in a teepee. They would come out freezing cold, sweat, get covered in sweat, then go into the arbor and dance, and basically be freezing for the first.
Like all the sweat now freezes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be freezing for the first 4 rounds until the sun crested the mountains and then just started burning them. And so it's like this.
It's just reminding me of like mountaineering, just like willed suffering.
Yeah.
Like choosing it.
Choosing to suffer, yeah. And it is a sacrifice. You know, they're in there, and what a lot of people are familiar with the Sundance is the sensationalism, and so I probably won't spend too much time talking about it, but the majority of the dancers at some point pierce themselves and attach themselves to the tree with a rope, and then they break free of that, so it's actually ripping out from their flesh.
Did this happen? That was part of this?
It was a big part of it. It was a lot of
on
it.
the last day.
Some dancers were attached the whole time, and then other dancers would just pierce for a round and break free on the same round.
What is it with all what you're saying? What did you feel being there? What was how?
Awe, a lot of awe.
Awe.
And so one description of awe that I like is it's a combination of like wonder and terror. That's something that is so like vastly powerful and meaningful.
Well, I don't know if terror is usually, when I think of awe, I didn't think of terror, but that's interesting that you said that.
That's a definition from Aragazzi.
No way.
And I think it makes sense because you're like, holy, like even if you look out at the mountains, you're like, holy crap, this is like so vastly more massive than me that it, like
an overwhelming
it could crush
little bit
me.
of a fear. Yeah.
Like I am so small and insignificant in comparison to whatever I'm in awe of. Right. So it's like my own impermanence. That I'm faced with in those moments of awe and potentially my own insignificance.
What was your role at Sundance?
So the firekeeper. So
you were the firekeeper.
I was one of the 16 firekeepers. Yeah.
16.
Yeah. And so I'd be working with this massive fire. We were blessed with being able to have a fire in this dry season. And it was so hot that like as we would open it up to access the rocks that were heating up for the lodges, like I would go to get it with a pitchfork and like my eyebrows would singe. And so I was trying to like find composure in that like really intense environment.
Yeah.
And I mean, contrasted to the dancers, like my role, like the intensity pales in comparison to what they were putting themselves through intentionally. But the firekeepers, it's like a very important role. The fire is a very important component of this ceremony that has all these different components. It becomes like a formula where everything is meticulously detailed and orchestrated in such a way that it amplifies the power of the prayer. And that's probably my biggest takeaway is the devotion that these people, which was, I don't mean like First Nations, I mean everybody that was participating, which was a very like multicultural inclusionary experience.
Devotion to the prayer.
Devotion to the prayer, devotion to the process, devotion to the tradition and the lineage and the culture. And again, that's something that is not present in like...
We don't have that.
We don't have that at all.
That's not part of Western society at all.
No.
Devotion, like I'm literally like my heart is pounding. Devotion to the prayer, that just sounds so right for me right now.
It was really, really inspiring. Really inspiring. And these people that are willing to bleed for their beliefs, to bleed for spirit, to bleed for greater connection, not only for themselves, but for everybody and for the collective healing of their family, their friends, their circles, but humanity as well. It's really, really amazing.
Fuck yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I feel so blessed to have been there, and it's something that is still intimidating in how meaningful it feels for me and likely part of the path I will be pursuing.
What's your prayer, Kyle?
It's really about the expansion of consciousness, like my own, but also collectively, so we could evolve and play at greater capacity. You know, how can we make this more beautiful and a more equitable experience? There's a lot of people who have created a wonderful life for themselves, but there's the saying that no man is free until every man is free, and as such, humanity has never been free.
Yeah, collectively we know, not that I know of. So what are some of the practices? What are some of the things to be doing? I mean, what are you doing, I guess that's a good start. What are the things you're doing? What are the things that are accessible for people that we can do? I think, I was talking to a friend recently, but breathwork seems to be popularizing, and for good reason, which is it's so accessible. It's the language of everyone. It's the fundamental language of life, information. So it's accessible. So I like that because we want to have something that's accessible for everyone. So some of those simple practices, not everyone goes into the forest like myself or you to sit down and like with a bunch of plant medicines, because it's scary actually. I think that's one of the reasons, but or it can be. Yeah. Or Sundance sounds amazing, but it could, like, I remember you being intimidated right before you were leaving. You were like, oh man.
Yeah, going into the unknown.
The unknown. Yeah. So what are some practices that you and you want to be doing, and how do we do that? What are the things to do to keep raising the vibration, raising the collective awareness?
So we're essentially stuck, quote unquote, stuck in a reality tunnel that is shaped based on our ego, which is our belief of who we are and how the world operates.
Our small cells.
Yeah. And so then we can do things to intentionally soften the edges of that reality tunnel. So Sundance is a big one. Doing 5 grams of mushrooms in the woods is another big one, not necessarily accessible to everyone and not necessarily recommended without support. Definitely not recommended without support. And breathing is super accessible. However, that could definitely bring people into an altered state of consciousness that can be uncomfortable, that can be revealing of deeper recesses of the psyche. And we don't know what we have intentionally or unintentionally buried in those recesses within the shadow. So again, it's about like looking for the full picture, the full truths in the places that are scary.
You're a seeker, though. Or not. I don't know if I want to call you a seeker, but you're curious. You ask the questions. Many don't.
So yeah, I have the ability to go there into the unknown, and
you intuitively want to.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
you love it. You love it.
Yeah, it's the same reason why I climb.
Yeah, you just love it. It's, all this stuff, this contemplation stuff. Like, you just love contemplation, like me. That's why we do this.
That's why we get.
But not everyone loves those. There's a lot of people who get totally, like, when they're around me, they're overwhelmed. Because, like, why can't you just say something more simple, or like,
why can't you talk about the weather?
Yeah, like, why can't it just be like, how was your day? And it was good, and I did a workout, and I felt good, or something like that. I don't know. Who knows, right? But it's overwhelming for a lot of people, because I always want to go deep, and it actually gives me energy. Whereas going deep for a lot of people it's kind of like the extrovert introvert kind of thing. Going deep for a lot of people, it takes energy. So, yeah.
So those who are meant to go deep, and they come back with some of the expanded awareness for others. And so if we go back to breath work, people don't have to go super deep in breath work. Like, we could take a regulating breath at any point in our daily experience, and maybe we do 5 minutes of self-regulating breath.
And people do that naturally anyways. Regardless of whether you're spiritual or whatever. That's the first thing people do when you... It's like when you get home from work. That's what people do. They like throw the keys on the desk, and you just... That's like breath work 101.
That is breath work, yeah. And then if it's brought in greater frequency, and then you could play with the intensity, then it creates a difference in our experience. So that's an accessible practice for everyone. Also, like the process of introspection, which could be done through dialogue with somebody who we feel safe and comfortable with. Right? Yeah. Expressing, externalizing what I have pent up, just like releases that tension. So to have friends who are space holders, or who have the emotional capacity to maybe listen to challenging experiences is really beneficial. And if that's not present, then we could do it through journaling. Right. So to externalize by writing it down on a piece of paper, well, now my system isn't stressed by having to carry that thing that I've been ruminating on in my brain all day about how I said something silly to that girl I like.
Do you journal? Or is that one of your practices?
I journal selectively. I journal when I know I need to journal.
Right.
And I think like a daily practice of journaling would be really good, and I don't do that.
Got it.
Other things, probably like my most favorite tool and recommendation to others is nature. Just getting out in nature.
Yeah.
And like, I swear when because a lot of my favorite places in Squamish are accessed via a logging road, I'll be on the logging road. I will take 3 steps off the logging road and into the forest. And it's like a different state of reality entirely.
Yeah.
And in that stillness, in the energy of the forest and the river, my nervous system like instantly regulates.
I 100% agree. And it's vice versa. When I go into the city, like in Vancouver now, my nervous system like clenches up and like I immediately am tense. I'm like more sensitive now.
So these are things that people have to be aware of about how our environment impacts us, right? So being downtown Vancouver versus in the forest in Squamish is going to be a very different energetic experience.
So it's even like the designing of cities is just done poorly. Everything about it.
Oh, this is something that I thought of, that I was contemplating coming back from Sundance, which was really jarring. Like after being out there for 8 days out of reception and being with these very loving, accepting, beautiful people, which also by the end I was completely saturated and needed alone time. Alone time is really important for people as well. I was coming back and I had to go like straight to a dentist appointment, which was like so antithetical to my Sundance experience.
Yeah.
And it was like I was coming from a world of circles, of connection, where everything like flowed with everything else into a world of boxes. And that's how we live in modern society, in boxes and boxes and boxes.
Right. And that circular, when we're in ceremonies, it's always circles and like flow.
And like nature doesn't have straight lines.
Totally.
You know, and we live in a world of straight lines.
Yes, we do, Kyle.
So other good practices, as we kind of touched on earlier, is this notion of community, like being in connection with people, coming together for intentional celebration, coming together to play music, to sing, to dance. And this is something that you're really good at curating. And it's like, okay, you could go and dance without an intention, and that's going to be a powerful experience. And then if we deepen our intention and share a collective intention, it's kind of like Sundance in that everybody's coming together with one purpose, one focus, one heart, one mind to have a specific outcome. And whether that's just play or expansion or healing, it doesn't matter, but it becomes more powerful when there's more intentional focus upon it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, that's what we, as a community, have been doing, and curating the intention and just centering it. Someone was asking me about sacred dance, which is the one we all do together now. Anyway, we were talking about sacred dance though, and what it means to me, because I'm kind of at least the equipment side of things and getting things set up at a high level. But it's Sundance. It's the dance of life. It's the prayer is through the dance, and that's what it means to me. And to me, it's celebrating existence through movement and like opening my heart and opening myself and celebrating creation. And I think it feels that way at the sacred dance. That's what it feels like for me, and that's the feedback I often get from people. Mm-hmm. By the way, I'd like you to be firekeeper at the next sacred dance.
Sure, I've had some initiation now.
You did great before you did the initiation, so now it'll be another level. Mm-hmm. But yeah, curating that intention. At the last sacred dance too, I actually went around with my camera and I was asking, just kind of filming people and asking, tell me what sacred dance is. That was the only question I had. And just like having them feel into that, just what is it and what arose first. And I think I did it for about 7 or 8 people. every single one of them said it's intentional. They used the word intentional. So that felt really cool to get that feedback, because that's actually what I was hoping would come out. Yeah, and it's just like the intention defines everything. It's like the will, the intention defines the attention, and then like what is seen and experienced, it completely revolves around it. And there's like a self-fulfilling component to reality. It just sees whatever everything is possible. So that's the brilliance of it.
Well, let's stay there, because now we're talking about a reality tunnel once again.
Right.
And so it's like, if I believe that I am this separate entity that has a singular life experience, and that when I die, that's the end, then I'm going to receive evidence to reinforce that belief.
Of course you will. Yeah.
If I think I'm part of this connected experience and there's a greater intelligence that is orchestrating this dance of humanity,
and it cares for it loves.
It loves, but that's a tricky one, because I have a different understanding of love.
Ooh, I'd like to go into that then.
Then, if I'm part of this greater flow and intelligence, then I'm going to see the synchronicities that are telling me of that.
Yeah.
If I understand that water has a consciousness and that it is like a form of God, like a really, really powerful spirit, then it changes my relationship with it and how I interact with it and how I consume it. Right.
And how you speak to it.
How I speak to it.
I literally now, I'm like if I'm actually sitting alone, I'm just like, thank you. Like, this is great.
Yeah, you're putting intention into your water.
And just being grateful. Like, I'm just like, because it's coming in, it's integrated into me and bringing new information, which is all healing information if you got good water.
And so then we can continue that expansion into greater consciousness. So now I'm sitting in a forest by a river, and I'm a part of a particular eco field. So that location has a specific energetic signature, which has an intelligence. And if I'm able to get out of my mind and drop into my body and my heart space, what information will come through that eco field and into my awareness to help guide me through my human experience?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And it's so interesting too, because in the last year I've gone through various trainings. One of them was through the Shamanic Yoga Institute. It's called the Medicine Wheel, and I've told you about it. But now I look and I call in guidance all the time, which, I'd never do that before. You're trying to figure it out. I'm gonna figure this out. I am going to do it. Now it's just like, I just open my heart and I'm like, yeah, what are the instructions? And then I go and trust it. I just follow the instructions and then stuff comes up and frustrations and emotions. And that's just part of life, part of the journey. But I just follow the instructions a lot more now, which seem to just come in through various informations. I'm like allowing it, like receiving and trusting that, even if it's not always a pleasant experience, right? It's often not, right? Or Sundance, you even mentioned, it's like, it's not easy. It's very difficult, but we open to it and receive it even anyways.
And I think those difficulties, like leaning into the challenge or the fire or the shadow, intentionally creates space for that information to come in, right?
Yeah.
So we all have these dense energies inside of us from our human experience, from the society we live in, from the traumas that we endured, whether that's small t trauma or capital T trauma.
Yeah.
And we have to like clear out that energy that is stuck in our body so that there is room for the information to then download, and we can receive that guidance and that intuition.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few minutes ago, just you had a different perspective on love, and I wanted to come back to that. What is your perspective? I don't remember what I asked, but what I said. What is your perspective on love? God's love, personal love? I'm not even sure. It's kind of a broad question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good point, is that there are different types of love. And so in the English language, we're limited to the single word to identify many different types of expression. Yeah. And ultimately, it's an energy. And if
love is an energy.
Yeah. And if we look at the Greeks, they have 6, and then I have 6 different words for love. And then I heard that the Sufis have like 99 words for love.
99?
Yeah. And so I don't know if this is just like something poetic that they speak about, or if there is literally 99 different words. So the problem is that we misconceive love in our culture, in that we feel we have to outsource it, and that we receive love from other people. And we could,
relative to how much we've given?
Yeah, quite often.
Right.
And we think that we only can access that energy through another person, right? So if I'm sitting here...
Like culturally, that's the way it's looked at. Like you love someone else or someone loves you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the common way of using it.
Yeah, and so then think about in a romantic relationship, I'm in love with this person, and then that person decides they no longer want to spend time with me, and then suddenly I no longer have access to love. Like, that's a bit of an absurdity.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's nuts.
So when we think about it, a lot of people suggest that God is synonymous with love, which also could be synonymous with truth. So then it becomes like this foundational building block of the universe. I think so, to a certain extent. And then I'll also introduce this other model, which is David Hawkins' map of consciousness, right? Okay. Which ranges from shame at level 20 at the very bottom all the way to enlightenment, which is 700 to 1,000.
Is enlightenment the same as love?
Well, love is on the chart below it. So actually below enlightenment is joy,
okay,
which we were touching on earlier.
Yeah.
And then love.
Interesting.
Beneath that. And so these are vibrational frequencies. These are also states of being that we can embody. And so we can identify where we're at on that chart in any given moment. And this is not something arbitrary. The numbers associated with the vibrations perhaps are, but he went through rigorous muscle testing in order to confirm that each name for the state of being was ranked in the appropriate position. And so he would do muscle testing not just with himself and his people that were part of the experiment, but he would also do blind muscle testing in other places with different testers and whatnot. And so they came to the conclusion that this was actually the order of vibration. So at the bottom we have shame, guilt, fear, apathy, and then I forget the others. And then at the middle is courage, which is interesting because we spoke about doing the hard things to expand into greater consciousness. So courage is the tipping point where it then brings people into neutrality, acceptance, and I'm forgetting some of them, but there's at the top love, joy, and enlightenment.
It's so interesting. I don't relate to any of this that way. I'll tell you about how I experienced it.
How you experienced love?
Yeah, from my own experience, because I haven't done any research. I haven't read someone's work on it. Mm-hmm. But what I understand love to be, I'll tell you once you finish yours.
So if love is this expansive state of being that we can experience, and to have our heart blown wide open, and sometimes intentional use of different medicines are really helpful for that. Mm-hmm. The night we were dancing together and I told you I loved you 6 times.
Yeah. I liked that.
And this state is accessible without those medicines, but it is a massive process of opening. And if love is synonymous with God, then love is all things.
That's what I would say.
The point I wanted to make when you initially commented on it, and I said I have a different perspective on it, that means that if love is all things, love is also present in the suffering.
Yeah.
Love is also present in the quote unquote bad things that we experience.
Yes.
And we have to remember that these things are here for our learning and our growth and our evolution. And if we are playing
with that though?
And if we are playing the long game, the infinite game, then we could come to that perspective. But if we're stuck in, again, our separate experience, our singular ego experience, then it's hard to understand that. I have a hard time fully embodying in trusting that, because I've had like a relatively privileged life compared to a lot of people who have experienced that capital T trauma over and over again and essentially live in it.
Yeah.
And so it seems really audacious for me to be like, hey, this is all love too.
Could I challenge you on that?
Sure.
If you actually feel like, from a conscious point of view, like if you truly feel realized in the fact that you've incarnated, everything about you from various perspectives, materially, spiritually, soul path has been going forever and ever. You have come from trauma at some point. You don't remember though.
Oh yeah.
So from that place, I can't remember my traumas anymore from past lives, but it's not a reason why I'm not going to build my relation with love in deeper and deeper levels based on privilege. Because privilege is just, again, for me, the way I look at that, I'm like, sure, if I'm going to go into the individual level, I could say I'm privileged, but I'm not playing from that place anymore. I don't want to, and I want to move out of that perspective. So at some point I had trauma, I just don't remember anymore.
Well, in this life, you've had trauma as well, but what I'm saying...
Relative to others, it'd be less, though, if we're using relativity.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is, when you're in the depths of the fire and in that suffering, do you think you're like, oh, it's okay, this is love?
No. But again, I guess I'll break in here to share what I understand love to be from my... Experientially, there's like personal love, like I'm in love with like my girlfriend or whatever. And it's like the personal love. But I've had experiences like, to me, love is, it's the substrate of it's made out of love. Reality is made out of it. It's not like an emotion at all to me. Like it's made out of love. Reality is. Love is just, there's no real word for it, so you can call it, it's made out of God, it's made out of love, it's the creation, but it's like the substrate of absolutely everything. It's the substrate of conscious awareness, and it's absolutely unchanging, and it's absolutely unjudgmental. It allows for every potentiality because it's an infinite source. So we're the ones who label these things as traumas, and these are good experiences, these are bad experiences. And some of us are in the midst of trauma, and some of us don't remember. We don't remember far enough back. In my own life experiences, I don't have like a lot of traumas that I can identify with that well. I do have them, but there's trauma that has happened to me as a soul and to all the biology that makes up me as a material body right now. But I don't actually have conscious awareness of it anymore that I could actually tell you with words right now. I just can't remember. But I know that it's been around there's a knowingness underneath it. It has experienced all those things, which is how it got to the state it's in today, right? That's why it's so resilient, because it's been through the battlefield. Like if you look at this body, like it's just a fucking powerhouse. Like it's been through the fires. I just don't really remember when it was in the fire, because it could have been many lifetimes ago. That's my understanding of love. It's the substrate of all creation that has no judgment and allows everything.
We have a similar understanding of it.
Yeah. And then again, on the personal level, I'm Brad and I love you, Kyle. So that's great too. And that's a cool experience too. That's an individuated experience of love. But that's not the God love to me. That's just like, I like you and your style, and Kyle, he's great. And my heart feels connected to your heart. Like it's much more personal love.
So then maybe the experience of true love is when two or more people are actually in that divine flow, where we're just like in the shared felt experience, and we're devoid of our separateness.
Maybe, but you also don't need to be with others though, because it's just for me, it's the love of creation.
Right, but it's like the saying from the Bible, where two or more gathered, you could find me there.
I like that.
Right? And so we do only know things in relativity. And so if we're there together and we're having a shared felt experience, it's like more objective and less subjective than me just being alone in my mountain, in the mountains, and being like, oh yeah, I'm experiencing love right now.
Yeah, I understand that. It's a good place to study. Just study love.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best book you know on love?
The first one that comes to mind is Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It.
I haven't read that one, but I've heard of it.
And it's by Kamal Ravikant.
Mm.
And it's essentially teaching a self-love practice. Like when I ask clients if they have a self-love practice, they're like, yeah, I do yoga. I'm like, well, that's not self-love. I'm like, that's self-care. Self-love is actually loving yourself. And that's something we're not taught. Going back to what I said earlier, we outsource our love through validation. But if every day, well, what I do actually do every day is every night before I fall asleep, I like put my hand on my body somewhere and I say, Kyle, I love you. Like, I love you.
That's an excellent practice.
And then the hard thing is doing that when I fuck up, when I make mistake, that I'm sitting there like ruminating about to say like, hey, it's okay, little guy, you know, you'll do better next time. I still love you. That's the hard part.
Sounds nice.
Yeah. And then the level up is to look in a mirror and stare yourself in the eye and say, I love you, and try to do that 10 times in a row.
Yeah. Man, I've had some super powerful mirror experiences.
Ooh.
One of my earliest, can I share one?
Mm-hmm.
Just because it just arose out of nowhere right now. So, but this is like in my first year starting to work with mushrooms. And yeah, I had been, my friend Jared had told me about mirror work and just like putting a mirror somewhere where you can go and stare at yourself and stuff. But I was on pretty high dosage, just probably like 4 grams or something like that. And I was staring, I saw myself in the mirror like across the room. And there was like a detachment that occurred where I was looking at him. So it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't like I'm looking at myself. I was looking at him and he's looking back at me, of course. And I wasn't smiling, but I was like very present, staring at myself. And it was just this deep, deep certainty of like, he was looking at me and he was just staring at me like, I've got you, man. Like, I've got your back. And I was like, and I was overwhelmed. Like, cause I was just and I was like, this guy has my back. And I was like, so stoked about it. And like overwhelmed, like, holy fuck, I could do anything if that guy has my back. Like, he's like, I will never give up on you. Like, I got you. And I wasn't wearing a shirt, and I was in really good shape at the time. And I was like a little bit intimidated, actually. And it sounds cocky to say it now that I'm saying it out loud, but that was the feeling. And I was just like, yeah, like, you got my back. Sick.
It's beautiful.
But I called it when I journaled, because I always do journaling, 1 page at least after a ceremony. And I called it the man in the mirror. So I realized the man in the mirror, and he's the one that will always be there. Right? And since then, it's like he's got my back. And he's like he's a warrior, and he's been a warrior since then.
And I think that's a super important realization. I really like that story, because at the end of the day, everything and everyone we love is going to leave us in some shape, way, or form, right? Yeah. And so if we have a solid foundational relationship with ourselves, if we find full belonging internally with all our various parts, then that's how we create resilience and the ability to persevere and the trust in that self-love.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing going on that I see is the biggest challenge I've had in my life. And I see it as the biggest challenge on the planet right now. We don't love ourselves collectively and individually. And I think it's just part of the mental health epidemic. The mind is sick. There is something in my world that I understand creation is, and God and whatever is absolutely an absolute prayer. It's an absolute blessing. And the mind has confused itself somehow, the collective mind, which we individuate now into like, but ultimately it's a mental health epidemic. It doesn't think it's good enough. It doesn't think it's worth loving. How did we get here? It's like, it's insane. That's what it is. And that's why we call it a mental health epidemic. It's insane. The mind has become insane, the personal mind. And it's shocking. And I think that's really what all of the work I'm doing now is around, right? That's why I do sacred dance. It's like to get out. That's why meditation, like that's why chanting and singing. The mind's sick. Just let's move out of that for a little while and reconnect with our hearts, because the mind collectively has become sick. But the heart knows.
The heart knows.
They say the biggest journey you'll ever make is from the mind to the heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so in that, as we get out of our mind, that's when we start to reconnect with spirit, and whatever that means to people, right? Everybody has their own interpretation of that, and I don't want to dogmatically enforce my notion or my models on others, but I do want people to find connection with something greater than themselves. And like I said, it could be just found in a forest, and it could also be found when you pick up a lighter in a bundle of sage. And so you have two different elements there. You have the earth and you have the fire. And when you bring these two elements together and you create the smoke that comes out of it, that's spirit. That's spirit right there. Yeah. So you combine any two elements and you're creating spirit. And as long as we bring that awareness and that intention and that presence to the experience, spirit can be found. Yeah. And we just have to slow down and remember and practice gratitude in our experience, which I hear you speak about when we have these playful expressions through dance. It's like, this is a gift. This body I have, this is a temple. And I'm so blessed to have it because I get to go dance. I get to hug you. I get to go climb mountains. Yeah. Like, let's start treating it with reverence. And in that, we will open to spirit, which is always present and constantly around us, in always loving us and ready to guide us and support us.
And constantly alchemizing into like new variations of the thing. So there's so much to explore through that alchemy. Yeah. So one thing I also want to bring up too is, or just pivot to, is you do, for work, I know you do psychedelic integration. Is that the way to say it? Mm-hmm. Psychedelic integration? Mm-hmm. What is that? And what have you... Yeah, how does that help? What is the issue that you're addressing, and how with that type of work?
Yeah, so the title I've landed upon is I'm a psycho-spiritual integration coach.
Okay.
So it
Sounds
started,
fancy.
Yeah, very fancy. Psycho-spiritual. So basically I focus on mental and spiritual wellness because I've recognized all the problems that we've spoken about during this entire conversation, and through my process of expansion, recognize how much more beauty can be found as we open up to the mystery. And so I seek to support people as they find their own opening and they go through their own process of clearing out the muck of their human experience, and so that they could play at full capacity. And so originally it was through just psychedelics. Like, that's where I started. I'm going to help people prepare for their psychedelic experience and then help people integrate. But then I also recognize that all of life requires integration. All of our human experience requires reflection. So if it's something that we could have done better, if we've like missed the mark, right? To sin is to miss the mark. So if we've sinned and we feel like negatively about that, it's like, all right, well, let's process that experience so we can learn from it, integrate it, right? So clear the charge.
Yeah.
Integrate the memory as wisdom as we learn from it, so we don't do it the same way next time. And even if it's a positive experience, something really joyful, it's like, okay, well, how do I sit here and really integrate that energy into my being so that I am embodying a different energy, vibrating at a different level. So then that shapes my reality tunnel and the way with which I move through life. And so it's utilizing all these tools we spoke about. And it's also really just like open dialogue. Like, a lot of people don't have the support to
just talking about it.
Talk about their authentic experience, right? We don't have the radical authentic expression because we have been so conditioned.
Don't talk about this. Don't talk about anything, really.
Don't talk about it because people might not love you.
Or, yeah, another one is just don't talk about it because it could trigger someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting one. It's like, here's authentically what I feel. And you just want to be authentic, really. but then we might back off from it because it's like it could trigger someone else, and then they'll have to feel something. And if they feel a bad thing, we don't want bad emotions because these are the good emotions, these are the bad emotions.
Yeah, we only talk about good things here. Have a drink and some pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, right. But I think that's a real thing. You don't want to trigger others because that would be bad because they could feel something not positive. And right, it goes back to just what is positive and what is negative and what are good emotions, what are bad. So much of the work I know I've done and you have with psychedelics, we're opening our spectrum of experience to all the potential of the human experience. And as the judgment fades, we have more ability. Like I remember for me, one of the earliest things was when I got access to sadness. So I didn't cry until I was like 28. And then my whole life opened up once I learned how to cry. I got access to a new experience, a new emotion, and that taught me about all the other emotions. I had more relativity, and it's like super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Because like the classic Carl Jung quote says, no tree can reach to heaven whose roots don't grow to hell.
That's good.
And that's it, broadening that spectrum, right? It's like, I want to experience more bliss and joy. Well, okay, I'm going to have to go into the shadow and see what's there and clear some of that gunk out.
Yeah, set some roots up.
Yeah. So I help people with that process. And it's interesting, the other thing I wanted to come back to is to behave authentically and to speak our truth. People hesitate to do that because it might trigger other people.
Yeah.
So where is that like sweet spot of balance? Because we want to be radically authentic in our expression, but we also want to be socially desirable. In fact, we need to be socially desirable, or else we just we'll be a hermit in the woods, which is totally okay too. But at some point in the human experience, that meant like certain death if we were kicked out of the tribe. Right. So there is like an awareness that comes with that. But if we have strong enough connections and relationships, and it's like, yo, brother, I got you, I'm devoted to you, then I know that I could show up in like maybe one of my shadow expressions, and you won't have judgment on that, and you'll be able to sit with me in that fire as I move through that shadow expression, so that I can learn from it and you can learn from it, and we can deepen our connection together.
I really love how you just brought that balance up, right? The balance of authentically expressing, which is part of the evolution of consciousness, but then, yeah, totally, I'm not beyond my ego and all these things. Like, I want to have friends and community. So I can't just go triggering everyone and pissing everyone off because my experience is this or that or whatever. So there is a balance, and I really like that you brought that up.
Thank you.
What else should we talk about, Kyle? Or have we spoken enough?
I feel like we're coming to a close, and I think maybe some parting words as I continue to reflect on my experience at Sundance and Fairy Creek, and as I become more exposed to Indigenous culture. And there's this divide between cultures and demographics, and these separations from the wrongs that we've done to each other. And no doubt the traumas inflicted from white settlers upon the First Nations runs deep. Like, that's a deep chasm that needs to be closed and brought together, and only through acknowledgement and true apology, right, will we find reconciliation.
Right.
And why that's important is because these Indigenous people, not only here in Canada or the United States, but throughout the world, it's the Indigenous cultures that are the wisdom carriers, that have that connection to spirit and to the earth. And as we get past our differences, our superficial differences in how we appear, we recognize that we are all indigenous to the earth. And with that, we are all connected. That is the unifying ground that we will always have, is that the earth is in fact our mother and gives us everything that we have. And we are in fact it. We couldn't exist without it. And that could be the thing that allows us to transcend our differences and come back into that right relation and to learn from one another. So although I may be white on the outside, I do feel that indigeneity internally. And with that, I'm going to continue to listen and to learn and to pay attention to those who are in right relation and who walk in the right way.
Amen. Thank you for sharing all of that, all of your wisdom. I see you. I love you. And I want to hug.
Love you too, brother.